Yorubas have this proverb. They say, "Tí ọmọ ìyá méjì bá wọlé, tó bára wọn sọ̀rọ̀, tó rẹ́rìn jáde, wọn bára wọn sọ̀tọ̀rọ̀." When two brothers or siblings, when siblings enter a room and come out smiling, it must be because they have been lacking in telling each other the truth. I have believed for a long time that the only absolute weapon by which you might slay the Nigerian monster, the monster of injustice, inequity, wickedness, evil, is the truth. So I've held it as a primary weapon, and I've believed in its potency in dealing with the Nigerian situation. So this morning, I'm bringing to you once again bitter truths. You know, in picking today's subject, when I called my PA and told my PA that I wanted to speak to the subject, this is Nigeria. It wasn't just this is Nigeria, it came with an adjunct that said this is Nigeria, the excuse for normalized madness. I said, or you can use this is Nigeria, the excuse for normalized abominations. And she was like, oh, Faz has a song by a similar title. That is, this is Nigeria. So, well, I'm something of a very, very deeply conservative person when it comes to my taste in music. And Fela, Bob Marley, the old juju music, that's about the extent of my musical exposure. And but I asked that she find the song for me, so I listened to it and I found that the gentleman was writing his music pretty much from the same place where I have been in recent times that has made that phrase, this is Nigeria, keep popping into my consciousness. So today, I want to speak to us about the subject, this is Nigeria. There are so many things, like I said, that should have come behind that, but I think it's fine enough so far. I'm sorry, I'm not plagiarizing. I concede the fact that is the title of your song, but it's just something that came to mind. But what do I mean when I said this is Nigeria? I think it is safer to start this conversation from the standpoint of the Ghanaian president, the one that went and said, this is not Nigeria. He declared a repulsion for madness. No, this is not Nigeria. Don't do that here. He was speaking to marauding Fulani herdsmen in the northern part of Ghana. This is not Nigeria. But what did he mean by that declaration? What does it mean when you say this is not Nigeria? Exactly what does it mean for it to be Nigeria or for it to be Nigeria? This is not Nigeria. This is not a place where you can act with impunity. This is not a place where the law does not matter. This is not a place where you can do things without regard to the rule of law or for law, the supremacy of life. This is not a place where you can do anyhow. That was what he was saying. This is not Nigeria. But this is Nigeria. So what does it mean for it to be Nigeria? There is a brilliant communicator with whom we have been blessed in this season. His name is Bello Galadanchi. If you are not following that cat, you ought to. When he gets to a point in his dialogue, one of his alter egos would go, he will probably go, "This is Nigeria, my friend." And Dele will go, "And there is that." So this is Nigeria. What does he really mean? What does it mean? It would appear that we will need to drill down in order to have a clearer understanding of the meaning of this is Nigeria. Let's start with the way we treat time. Time is probably one of the most intangible of assets because you really only can measure it by your clock. It's almost so intangible that you do not understand its passage unless you're focused on time and season. Yorubas have this interesting way of measuring time. It says, "Ìgbà ò kí ń pẹ́ lọ bí òréré, òréré ọmọ ọlọ́fin." Time tiptoes as Orere, the daughter of Olofin. It is the belief of the Yoruba that if you are not watchful of time and you do not take advantage of time and you are not careful with how you manage time, it tiptoes and time goes. Opportunities are lost and things that should be done within a time do not get done. So Yorubas had a very, very keen understanding of the need to pay attention to time and to use it rightly. And this is the same in almost all the cultures of Africa. In fact, we're so mindful of time that there are so many of our proverbs that speaks to the importance of the passage of time and how we should take advantage of every opportunities given to us by time. Yorùbá will say, "Ìgbà ara là ń búra, ẹnìkan ò kì í bú Ṣàngó lẹ́rùn." Do what you need to do when you need to do it. You cannot possibly be planting in the dry season. You can't. This speaks to the primacy of time and timeliness in our culture. But what do you find today? What do you find? We've evolved Nigerian time. Nigerian time. An excuse for madness. That makes it okay for us to have something scheduled to start at 12 o'clock and we start by 4. Meetings, events. Some artists actually think it's okay. In fact, I've heard of artists who got paid good money to perform at concerts who abuses the fans after coming into the arena late. What that? Think about it. So we evolved to the point where we have a uniquely silly culture that endorses the waste of time. We have Nigerian time. Oibos will be invited to Nigerian events. The internet is replete with all kinds of videos of Oibos, both memes and reality, getting to Nigerian events at the advertised time, only to find that we have no respect for ourselves or for time. Uniquely Nigerian. Or should we speak about the Nigerian factor? The one that makes it possible for a theory to work in one geographical space or come to Nigeria to die. Should we speak about that? The Nigerian factor. What is it about Nigeria that makes it okay for us to accept madness? without flinching, to normalize it by our acceptance. Think about it. What makes that so easy? Why have we become so acculturated to madness as a collective that our very reality appears to be speaking to insanity? How? What happened to us? Nigerian factor. So because of the Nigerian factor, we've been building a Jakarta steel complex for decades. Nigerian factor. Because of the Nigerian factor, we're in national debt to build a moribund rail system. Because of the Nigerian factor, it has taken us almost 20 years to resurface Lagos-Ibadan Expressway. Resurface Lagos-Ibadan Expressway. What happened to us? Nigerian factor is the explanation for everything that has gone wrong with us as a collective. Nigerian factor. What is this Nigerian factor? But let's again look at us through the prism of A Stranger's Eyes. The lying David Cameron. Because I did read what Jonathan had to say in response to the lies he told in his memoir. But David Cameron said something that is pretty interesting and that is worthy of attention in dealing with This Is Nigeria. He says we're fantastically corrupt. Fantastically corrupt. That was what David Cameron said. But why would he say this? Fantastically corrupt. You know what fantastic means? Unbelievable. And he's right, Painful as it is to agree with him, but he's also wrong. But let's look at it this way. So David Cameron belongs in a culture where a prime minister cannot retain his office because he lied about COVID restrictions and how he parted through COVID restrictions. Any conflict of interest of any sort would have a prime minister resign his office. Talk less of ministers or heads of agencies. The slightest whiff of scandal, they resign their offices. But our own country, our president flies around in the private jet of his best friend, whose company he awarded a no contest, no bid contract, where a kilometer of road is started at 4 billion, where land has been expropriated, and his son sits on the board of this company. But not only has the Nigerian press been largely silent, nobody thinks anything is wrong. It's only bellyachers like us that are complaining. It's fantastic, unbelievable. But is it corruption? Nah, we're not corrupt. Let's stop with all those lies. This is Nigeria. We are beyond corruption. We shouldn't call it corruption. Now, it's got nothing to do with corruption. That's not corruption. That is not corruption. And I dare say, there is no Yoruba word for corruption or Igbo word for corruption for that matter. You might begin to describe it, but nothing in our cultures prepared us for what we are witnessing today. Language is evolutionary. The Yoruba culture never expected what we are seeing in our country today. It didn't envisage Nigeria or the putrefaction that has been normalized in Nigeria. Nah. Don't let nobody fool you. The Nigerian is different from the Yoruba or any of the indigenous nations that are trapped in this catastrophe. Fact of the matter is that Yorubas had a proverb, or have a proverb, that speaks to the root of this issue. So what's that proverb? It says, ìlú tí kò sí òfin, ẹ̀ṣẹ̀ kò sí níbẹ̀. I'm going to try my best to unbundle that proverb for you, because it actually does speak succinctly to the madness that has overtaken us, and that is found at the root of this is not Nigeria, and this is Nigeria. And what is this? Ìlú tí kò sófin, a town devoid of laws. Ìlú tí kò sí òfin, a town, a city, a nation, an empire devoid of laws. Ẹ̀ṣẹ̀ kò sí níbẹ̀. There can be no crimes in such a place. So ìlú tí kò sófin, ẹ̀ṣẹ̀ ò sí níbẹ̀. The land devoid of laws cannot have crimes. But this is very strange in Yoruba thinking. How can there be a Yoruba entity, enclave, a city, a kingdom devoid of laws? The Yorubas had evolved a highly civilized and sophisticated empire, long before the European evolved their democracies. We had developed highly stylized societies with systems of rules, taboos, and laws ingrained deeply into the cultures. We had almost ritualized ways of doing certain things, like washing ourselves, eating, the way you keep your broom. They had all kinds of taboos, which were all ways of strengthening rules. So the Yoruba's consciousness could not have imagined a place devoid of laws. So the Yorubas were not talking about a place without laws. They were actually speaking to a place where the law does not rule. Yorubas would say, Bàbá ń torí ẹrú ṣòfin ká rántí ọjọ́ tí ó mọ̀mọ́ ọba tí ó mọ̀mọ́ ìjòyè. If we make laws because of the slaves, we must remember the day when the children of the worthies and kings will be caught by those rules. That will tell you of an egalitarian society where before a law may be said to be law, it must have universal application, which would mean that the same law that will catch the children of the commoners will catch the children of the royals. That was the kind of society that the Yorubas had evolved. So they were not talking about a place devoid of laws. They were talking about a place where the law does not rule. And they did not evolve societies where the law did not rule. They had societies that were governed by laws. Laws governed Yoruba societies. So they were not talking about a place ungoverned by law. But they didn't have Nigeria in contemplation when they were speaking about a place ungoverned by law. But Nigeria is actually the place that they were describing. So Nigeria is not fantastically corrupt, as David Cameron stupidly said. Nah, ignorant man. Or maybe he was just being nice and he didn't want to call out what it was that he could see very clearly in our country. And what is very evident in our country is a complete and total absence of the rule of law. And that is why he wrongly imagined that we as a collective are fantastically corrupt. We are not fantastically corrupt. There are thousands, hundreds of thousands of Nigerians who are languishing in jails, either awaiting trial or have been convicted for crimes that are nowhere near anything as grievous or wicked as the ones that are being committed against them every day by those who purport to rule Nigeria. So we're not fantastically corrupt. It is impunity that has overtaken our land. And this has made madness, abominations normal in the country Nigeria. Not necessarily because the people themselves are like that, but because impunity means that there are no consequences to the actions and inactions of men and women. And in the absence of sanctions, consequences, what has happened is that we have normalized madness in our country. This is Nigeria, and it's okay for us to have almost 20 million children, largely drug addicted and slapping the street without any training, no education, nothing. They have no use to themselves, practically no use to society, giving up, thrown away by the society, walking the street. And in the same country, we're busy appropriating money to buy private jets for men who have private jets for themselves to add up to our presidential fleet. We're spending billions buying yachts. We're spending billions constructing car park. We're spending billions building presidential mansions, vice presidential mansions, renovating. And we have children slapping the streets, unemployed and unemployable. And we have no program for bringing them out of the condemned life. The condemned lives that we have foisted on them as a collective. This is Nigeria. We're planting storms, and we shall reap whirlwinds the way these things are going. You want to talk about the religious hypocrisy, the lies being told from the pulpits, both in the mosques and in the churches. You want to talk about the mind-numbing lies being told in the name of God. And men and women, desperate men and women, are lapping it up. This is Nigeria. You want us to talk about how words come to Nigeria to die and adopt new meanings. You want to talk about our democracy. A democracy where INEC switches off IREV. That's a democracy. People are running around preparing for off-season elections where a man without shame, Yakubu, is still the one superintending. People are talking about 2027. Yakubu is still sat there. This is Nigeria. Madness has become the norm. National grid is collapsing. Not unlike the way Bulaba himself collapsed the other day when they were celebrating the Democracy Day. Think about it. This is Nigeria. Everybody is on generator now. This is Nigeria. Band A, Band B, Band whatever. This is Nigeria. We have spent more money trying to generate darkness. Obasanjo's regime, I believe, spent about $16 billion. To do what? But this is Nigeria. Nobody has paid for it. Nobody. Nigerians can be jesuing Charlie because of maybe about 4 or so people who were killed during the attack in France. They can be jesuing Charlie. But over 200 Nigerians were murdered when the Air Force bombed a refugee camp in Burma. The same week, Nigerians had nothing to say, largely had nothing to say about the people in Burma who just got killed. Refugees already in the land of their own birth. In their ancestral land, they were refugees. In Nigeria, they were refugees. They were killed. But Nigerians were focused on Jesuing Charlie. Nigerian soldiers were slaughtered by Boko Haram. And they were being buried, I believe, in Kaduna. Buhari had time to attend party with the top echelon of the APC and government, but could not find time to attend their burial. One policeman was killed in an attack in France. One policeman. It was a supermarket. The same week, France shot down, flew his flag at half-mast, mourned that policeman. We moved on. I recently saw the Kenyan reactions to the murder of protesters by the Kenyan police. I didn't read of a single Kenyan denying that it happened. Up until today, people who should know better are still denying what happened at Lekki. But if you don't take Lekki as your measure, why not take the Kaduna State panel of inquiry, its own panel of inquiry, where it confirmed, I think it was 430 Shia were killed by Buratai's convoy. But this is Nigeria. There is always a reason to justify madness. They were Shia. They were not really Muslims. It didn't matter. Oh, the ones at Lekki Toll Gate, they wanted to burn down Nigeria. What did you want the government to do? There is always a reason to explain the madness that we have all become acculturated to. This is Nigeria. I could end right there, see? But then the entire purpose will be lost. This is the country that we have built. All of us as a collective. None of us are exempt. We all are guilty. We've built a mad place, sick place. We've built a really, really sick place. My wife runs a store, a food business. A Sunday, pretty much like this one, my wife went to the store in the afternoon. And she happened to go into the kitchen in the store. And then she found they had fried 3 crates of eggs and cooked 10 tubers of yam. 3 crates of eggs, that's 90 eggs. There were less than 25 staff on duty on the day in question. That's over 3 eggs per person that the staff had cooked. Not even one of them thought there was something wrong with what they did. Not one believed anything was wrong with what was done. How do you explain frying 90 eggs for a meal that was going to be consumed by about 25 persons? And you know what else? There was no provision for this meal. It wasn't to the knowledge of the management. That is Nigeria. That is Nigeria. This is the country that you and I, all of us, have built. A country without standard, a place where anything goes. Anything goes. That's the country we have built. And that is not sustainable. It is not sustainable. We have to do something drastic if this must stop. Even though we use the word feudalism in relation to Nigeria, the common error that is often made is to overlook the centrality of that concept to the country that we have managed to evolve. And without a conceptual understanding of the issues, it becomes that much more difficult to address the challenges. Now, you all, you see, the challenge with Nigeria is that we almost always have concepts and precepts, ideas and principles imported from foreign lands, and they come to Nigeria and they become Nigerian. And I'm sorry to say, but when we say it becomes Nigerian, what we are saying essentially is that it becomes insane. The totality of the idea becomes something radically different from what the originators intended. So when you say Feudal Republic of Nigeria, obviously I'm playing on the lie that Nigeria has told itself since 1966, and that is the lie of federalism. So instead of saying federalism, I am calling it what I know it to truly be, which is feudalism. But in order for us to understand ourselves, I think it is only right and proper that we should attempt to define some of these precepts, and then we can then get around to the business of tying up the loose ends. So even though it is not present there, it is necessary that we have a clear understanding of what federalism is, because that is the word that I have taken out, essentially, federal, feudal. So now, what is federalism? Federalism is essentially a system of governance that allows co-independent and codependent units to come together and operate within a nation state or a state. Now, that's all big grammar, dogonturenchi, but if you break it down to brass tacks, what it means is that you have a system of governance, a structure of governance where you have a central government and then you have federating units. These federating units are largely independent of the central government, but the central government has control over spelt out powers and areas of national life. So it's not something uniquely Nigerian, it is a global concept. And in the first part of this talk, I'd actually explained the origin, how it took Chief Obafemi Awolowo to propose federalism as a compromise between the two extremes that were present at the time in the lead up to the 1954 Constitution. What you had was a situation where Zik, the nationalist, wanted a unitary system, which was essentially what the British had run with originally, which was why Obafemi Awolowo and the Western region essentially staged a walkout from the operation of the 1946 Richards Constitution, which attempted to foist federalism on Nigeria. And then you had the Ahmadu Bello extreme, which wasn't prepared to be in a country where it would be subject to the control of anyone other than the North. So Obafemi Awolowo proposed a middle ground, and that middle ground was federalism, which allowed each region to run at its own pace and to evolve at its own pace. And that middle ground was the introduction of federalism into Nigeria. And in that federal Nigeria that was found and essentially began its construction largely from 1954, what you found very quickly was that each region had its own constitution. Each region
had complete control over local government. I stand to be corrected, but I know as a fact that the southern part of Nigeria had by far more local government than the northern part of Nigeria, by far more. I believe, even though I cannot vouch for this now unless I do a little more research, but I believe it is correct to say that the western region actually had more local governments than a combination of the eastern and northern region, because local governments were not centered, one, for the distribution of revenue. It never was. It was just a place for the regions to use as a point of contact with their people and as a basis for development. That was what they were. They were administrative units created by regions. They had nothing to do with revenue allocation. Nothing, absolutely nothing. So you had a situation where the federating regions at the beginning each had control over their space, over even revenue to a very large extent. It was derivation. So we had a true federal system beginning from 1954, and this subsisted essentially for 12 years, because by the end of the second coup of 1966, every pretense at federalism has been abandoned. Effectively, when you look to the reality, what has happened is that federalism is non-existent in Nigeria as things stand today, because we have moved further and further away from the federation that was inaugurated in negotiating the existence of Nigeria. I will not spend time dealing with the histories. As I have said, you will find this in the first part. But the critical thing to understand is this. In 1960, the Nigerian Federation or the Nigerian state would not have existed if there hadn't been an agreement amongst the constituent units to have a federation, because nobody was prepared to live in a unitary Nigeria. The North was not prepared to live in a unitary Nigeria. He made it clear, abundantly clear. Ahmadu Bello was prepared for the North to go alone rather than to become part of a unitary Nigeria. Obafemi Awolowo demonstrated the readiness of the western part of Nigeria to walk away from the Nigerian state if it wasn't prepared to find a middle ground apart from the unitary system. This is evident from the boycott of the federal parliament by the action group upon the introduction of the 1946 constitution. So you have a situation where the one thing practically everyone could agree on at the foundation of Nigeria is that they do not desire a unitary system for the governance of a multi-ethnic, multi-religious entity called Nigeria. So, when the military incursion began in January, the death knell was sounded for federalism. This is necessarily so because the command structure of the army couldn't have accommodated a federal structure. Everything had to be centralized. In the immediate aftermath of the coup, of the second coup and the beginning of the civil wars, almost all resources had to be federalized, which began the journey to the over-centralization of powers in the federal government and the beginning of the transition to a feudal system. I will not spend too much time on the histories of Nigerian federalism, but it is critical to touch on it, and I have. But it is now even more important to speak to the feudal nature of the country that we have evolved. But what is feudalism? It is critical that we have a clear understanding of feudalism. So because of these, I will again take a brief excursion into history in order to give you the foundation for the discourse. However, go and watch the first part of this video. Now, feudalism is not particularly new to the country called Nigeria. In the lands that were eventually cobbled together and christened Nigeria by Lugard Zolosho Flora, there were in existence two feudal states or feudal empires. One was the Kanem Borno Empire. The second was the Sokoto Caliphate. These two empires predated the British by at least 100 years in the case of the Sokoto Caliphate. And in the case of the Borno Empire, probably by as many as about 200 years. They were here long before the British were here. The vast part of Nigeria, known as Northern Nigeria, contained parts, only parts of those two empires. They were largely slave trading empires, and they existed on the platform of feudalism. Feudalism is about the acceptable non-equality of people who live in a geographical space. What do I mean? It speaks to a multiple level of residency, because you cannot speak to citizenship in the absence of the equality of rights. But in feudal states, there is a ruling class which is superior over and above the remaining two classes, which are made up essentially of one, those who serve the ruling class and communicate between the ruling class and the underclass, which are the serfs. So in that class, you have the merchant class, you have the military class. Sometimes there can be a level of class migration, very rarely, because the class structures are very rigid. So you have the ruling class, those who serve the ruling class and work for the ruling class in dealing with the underclass. So you have highly stratified societies, and these were the things this was what was in place already in northern Nigeria before the British came. So by the time the British came, the British merely layered on existing structures that they found within the Nigerian space. So in doing this, you had a situation where in northern Nigeria, vast parts that were never fully conquered, deliberately so, because if they had conquered these parts, they would have had to stop enslaving them. These parts were placed under emirs. You need to go to the first part of this speech. You'll find it there. And this is to explain how feudalism was deliberately allowed to thrive even after the coming of the British. Indirect rule meant that emirs who didn't have powers over certain parts that they had never conquered were given powers over those parts. Chiefs were subjugated to emirs. In eastern Nigeria, Where Igbos do not have kings, warrant chiefs were created to serve the interest of the British. Warrant chiefs. In the West, where the Yorubas had an established monarchical system of governance, not feudal, monarchical, and the Yorubas had evolved such sophisticated societies that you can actually speak to citizenship in Yoruba traditions. Because, for instance, Yorubas will tell you that ibita bi eru la bi omo, ta ba ntori eru shofin karanti ojo ti o momo joye. As we birth the commoner or the slave, so are the highborns also battered. That is a Yoruba proverb. The other one says, when you're making rules with the children of the slave in your mind, on your mind, remember the day when the same laws will catch your own children. These are Yoruba proverbs that offers a peek into the egalitarian society that they had evolved. No Oba had absolute powers in truth over any Yoruba person. Oba had his property, the other person had his property, and the Oba is obliged to respect the property rights of his subjects. So you had a situation where pre-independence, the British had evolved a system that discounted citizenship as long as the people followed the rules that the British had laid down. How the locals enforced this rule, collected taxes to a very large extent, was in their business. If you have been fortunate enough to watch the cinematic offering, Olufunlayo Ransom Kuti, you would have an idea of the level of citizen participation from the average Yoruba person pre-independence, pre-colonial times. But this mishmash of nationalities cobbled together agreed at the beginning of the Nigerian experiment that there should be a federation, but that federation, as I have said already, is dead to be replaced by feudalism. So this feudalism that I have spoken to, how has it arisen? What does it mean for us? How does it really operate? What does it mean? As I have said already, feudalism is essentially about the acceptable non-equality of those who live within the same geographical space, but it also means that the law simply does not rule in such a space. Now, when you look at the feudal states that were in existence before the coming of Nigeria, and then you look at feudalism as a classic concept, and then you have to come quickly to the understanding that there are three pivots upon which feudalism rests in Nigeria, because we're about the last of the feudal states remaining in the world, and ours is being modernized even as it races back into the Middle Ages. So what does it rest upon? The first is weaponized ignorance, the acceptable stupefaction of those who should be citizens in order to condition them to accept each and every evil that the state propagates is evident within the Nigerian space. Nigeria spends little or nothing on education, has over 15 million children, youth slapping the streets unemployed, school age, not going to school, has a massive population of youth unfit for any gainful employment of any sort because they have not been offered any training of any sort. No training, nothing. Largely drug addicted. That is not by accident. It is a tool of feudalism, weaponized ignorance. But aligned to weaponized ignorance is weaponized poverty. When a man is impoverished in his mind, when he is rendered ignorant, when he has become stupefied, when he has been rendered incapable of using his God-given imagination to think his way out of his limitations, then he becomes susceptible to poverty. But when you now have these aligned to institutional measures to assure that the person is perpetually kept underfoot and incapable of raising himself by any bootstrap because he has no bootstrap in the first place, you then begin to understand the nature of the evil that has been unleashed against the Nigerian. How? How to explain? There is no access to credit. No access to credit for the poor man in a society that claims to be capitalist. No access to credit. And I'm not just talking about the poor man, even those who are meant to be members of the middle class. The cheapest facility available to any Nigerian today is in excess of 30% interest. That is the cheapest available to any Nigerian, and no Nigerian bank institutionally can lend you money based on an idea. It's not possible. Even if there are interventionist funding available, you still have to go through the commercial banks, and the commercial bank has a primary duty to ensure that your loan is collateralized. That is one. Secondly, almost all legitimate opportunities have been closed off. Every opportunity that the youth might find for self-actualization, for enrichment, for wealth, is closed off. Somebody is going to go put it. The system would license someone to have a toll gate so that the wealth, however little that these imaginative young persons might make, eventually comes back to the system. I need not speak too long. Look at what they are doing with the UAE thing. After shamelessly posturing for over a year about how they have reopened the Dubai route to Nigerians, I don't know what anybody is looking for in that place. Yeah, it's a beautiful country, but they are more than racist. Theirs is even worse. But at the end of the day, Nigerians need some escape. And what have they done again? Find a way to put a toll gate there so that the Nigerian desirous of traveling to UAE pays through his nose. They don't even think about the effect these have on our country, the image of the country. And yet they'll be talking about Hush Puppy, and there is Hush Daddy, Hush Dog, Hush Bingo, Hush everything up and down the place. The system ensures that, one, there is no light. You don't have public power supply. There is energy poverty. To even power generator in order to do anything productive is next to impossible. The multiple taxes that are there to squeeze anyone who is able to do anything is almost like trying to grow something on rocky surfaces. Nigeria appears to have become a killing field for ideas, for ingenuity. The average person who should be thinking of starting industries are thinking that their monies are better invested in running away from the country. That is the level of weaponized poverty that has been unleashed. People are not migrating, they are escaping because the system has deliberately weaponized poverty against those living in the environment. Federalism has been completely asphyxiated. Everything centralized. But what does this have to do with everything? Why do I feel a need to speak to a second part of this sermon? Why today's sermon? I'll tell you. When Bola Ahmed Tinubu perfected his electoral heist, and the Supreme Court, nay, the entire judiciary, barring few men of honor, men and women of honor, sold their consciences to legitimize a fraud. I remember saying at the time, the Nigerian constitution had been effectively shredded, and that eventually we will come to understand that Nigeria died the day that electoral heist was legitimized. As if to confirm outright and prescient those words have come to prove to be. The Supreme Court delivered a ruling or a judgment in recent days, and a lot of people are busy jumping up and down the place celebrating what they are calling local government autonomy. And I laugh. I laugh because I realized that Fela was completely right when he said something in his time, it will take 20 years to understand him. When one is dealing with a people who have been focused on existential consideration, whose preoccupation is essentially about what they are going to eat, how they will survive, it becomes difficult to engage their imagination in envisioning the future that is being designed for them with avarice. Why do I say this? Tinubu built his reputation as a Democrat and a Federalist on the back of the brilliant assault carried out on the 1999 fraud by his Attorney General in Lagos State, Professor Yemi Osinbajo. And a series of cases went all the way to the Supreme Court. And I'm sure you would all remember the celebrated one about local government between himself and General Obasanjo, Lagos, and the federal government. And this was the case where it was held that Obasanjo was wrongly holding on to the local government funds in Lagos State. Now, the same Tinubu who created LCDAs in Lagos State, I believe he took the local governments in Lagos State from 20 to 57 by the addition. Anyway, the same man who took over almost all the functions of the local government in Lagos State, who single-handedly hijacked the totality of local governance in Lagos State, the same man who made sure that Jide Koro's son, that when that one won the Lagos Island local government election, they ensured that he wasn't sworn in. The same person is the one who has now caused the Supreme Court, that is essentially in his pocket, to ignore the obvious provisions of the fraudulent constitution and then declare that the local governments have financial autonomy, ignoring the clear provisions of the constitution that calls for the operation of the joint accounts between the local government and in the states. Completely ignoring this, ignoring that the local governments are not part of the federating unit, but are actually part and parcel of the states. But the lies that have been told over the years in relation to Nigeria, in relation to local governance, the lies that had made local government become something to be placed in the schedule to a federal constitution, the same lies that made Obasanjo justify not paying the local government funds because of the creation of additional one, the same lie that Tinubu once fought against are the same lies that he has today embraced. So now Tinubu is the born-again champion of local governments in Nigeria. The full implication and ramification of the Supreme Court judgment can only be lost on fools. The INEC of Mahmoud Yakubu, the same fraudulent, shameless Yakubu, and the institution, the shameless institution that he headlines, are now going to be the saints conducting election for local governments in a federal state. Welcome to the feudal Republic of Nigeria. There is a man that you have all ignored and to whom you should learn to pay closer attention. The current Attorney General of the Federation, Lateef Fagbemi, and his boss have a clear idea of exactly what kind of restructuring they are carrying out. But what I see is the feudalization of Nigeria. And Lateef Fagbemi and Bola Ahmed Tinubu should be watched carefully. Nigeria is heading closer and closer to ensuring that the president of Nigeria is the Sultan of Nigeria, and that the governors are the emirs. Local government chairmen, I don't know exactly what they are trying to do, but I'm suspecting that they are intended as checks on the powers of the governors. I hope by the time Bola Ahmed Tinubu is done with Nigeria, the same errors that were made by Southerners before him, particularly Obasanjo, who helped to build the foundations for the feudalization of Nigeria, I hope the same errors made by Obasanjo are not going to be compounded by Bola Ahmed Tinubu, all in a push for temporal, ephemeral powers. Men will leave office, seasons will end, but there are consequences to actions. Nigeria is being feudalized. I don't know whether Tinubu realizes it, but if anyone is unaware that the Federal Republic of Nigeria is dead, let them think again. Welcome to the feudal Republic of Nigeria. I'm going to see you all next week. God bless you. Stay blessed. And yes, happy birthday once again to a dear General, His Excellency Peter Gregory Obi. I am proud of you. You are a worthy general to follow to war. God bless you. And yes, God bless everyone. Amen to that.